Welcome to Fearless with Jason Whitlock. I am Jason Whitlock, your host. Happy Tuesday. I'm going to try not to even spend any time hyping this show. I'm going to let the show speak for itself. I will advise you. Call your friends. If you know someone in the NBA, if you know someone in the sports world who's ever had a problem with Stephen A. Smith, if you care about truth, just let people know that it's fine. You can hate me. It's fine. But just ignore your hate for me for this moment. Ignore your love, your worship of Deion Sanders for this moment. And ask them to come in and just say, just hear Whitlock out. He's going to unpack some truths that will hopefully help you understand the world and what's going on in the world on a larger, grander, more nuanced level. And that when this show is over, you can go back to hating me and worshiping Deion Sanders. You can go back to lying and say, oh, Whitlock hates black people. I'm good with all of it. But just for this show, throw all your biases, throw all that feminine energy that's been built into you, put it on the side, and just enjoy, digest, analyze these truths that I'm about to unpack. And I know Stephen A. Smith, how could he's not important. He's just a sports talk show host. What are you doing? And I'm just, hear me out. Just hear me out today. And you can go back to Twitter and say nasty things about me. You can even go in the comments and say nasty things about me. I'm good with all of it. But today I'm going to try to unpack some truths that will help you see the world more clearly. So just take these vitamins or this gold, this currency that I'm trying to give you, and you can go run off and do whatever you want with it. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm not even asking you to understand me. I understand the programming that you've gone through, and I understand what the world requires, that you all pretend like, oh, why Whitlock, we talking about this or that. Doesn't he know that we're in a war with white people and he should just be spreading white hate? And that's what being pro-black is. It's hating white people. You can go back to all of that. Just today, I'm asking, put it to the side, open your mind and ears and eyes to a different perspective. You can go back to sleep tomorrow, but at least you will have been told the truth so that you can properly understand the world. The other favor I need you to do is hit the likes, hit the subscriptions here on YouTube. If you're watching over Apple, you can even wait to the end of the show. I'd prefer that you start pounding that 5-star rating right now. But if you're an objective person, when this show's over, you'll be like, man, I got to hit the 5-star ratings. I can't get this anyplace else. Everybody else is denying me this level of truth. I now understand the world. I now understand what Cat Williams was talking about in his interview with Shannon Sharpe so much better. Whitlock has given me real life examples and a way to interpret that in a way that I completely understand and can completely relate to. Not going to hype the show. I'm going to let the facts speak for themselves. I would ask, and I know NBA players and NFL players, where there's some penalty for engaging with the truth, that, your agents and your handlers have such tight control over you. There are things you're not allowed to think, things you're not allowed to say. Put all that aside and just accept what's about to happen on the show today. At the back end of this show, Steve Kim, I believe, will come and join us, and that's going to happen if I show some discipline and unpack all that I'm trying to unpack. in a timely fashion. If Steve Kim, if the Korean Cosell is not on today's show, it's because I was undisciplined, and it's my fault. But I want Steve Kim to chime in on this stuff at the end, as long as I make room for it and do a good job of getting through all of this information I'm about to unpack. Before I get into this hellacious fire that I'm about to start, I want to take care of one of our great sponsors. If you want a better way to simplify your business and finances across expenses, vendor payments, and accounting, if so, Ramp could be a complete game changer. Ramp's accounting software automatically collects receipts and categorizes your expenses in real time, so you don't have to. You'll never have to chase down a receipt again, and your employees will no longer spend hours submitting expense reports. The time you'll save each month on employee expenses will allow you to close your books 8 times faster. Ramp saves you money. Businesses that use Ramp save an average of 5% the first year. And now get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/fearless. That's ramp.com/fearless. Ramp, RAMP.com/fearless. Cards issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank. Members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. All right. So Stephen A. Smith, for those of you that did not watch ESPN this morning in the first take, Stephen A. Smith has responded to some of the things I've been talking about on this show starting late last week, and about as it relates to his memoir, his book Straight Shooter, and just how I connected Stephen A. Smith to the Cat Williams interview with Shannon Sharpe, and how I connected Cat Williams' claim, position, that people like Kevin Hart, people that, somewhat talented, but not nearly as talented as his peers, they get installed in the prime position and get to be the face of comedy because they've taken a deal to make sure they promote all the things the regime and the people in power, the people in Hollywood, the white liberals, the secular Jews that control Hollywood. Kevin Hart, in Cat Williams' mind, stays on message. And so I said last week and doubled down later in the week that Stephen A. Smith is the sports example of what Cat Williams was talking about in that interview with Shannon Sharpe. And I walked you through some of the lies, distortions, exaggerations that are found in Stephen A.'s book that just raise all kinds of questions about, like, what's he doing with his narrative? Who would print these lies? Who would write these lies and or exaggerations? Who thinks these stories pass the smell test? That, in February of '88, this guy drives down to North Carolina and has a one-day tryout with a Division II basketball team at the end of their regular season, knocks down 17 straight three-pointers, and the coach, Big House Gaines, on the spot offers him a full ride basketball scholarship. Who sells that? Who believes that? What person, any familiarity with sports, would buy that? So I've been talking about that, and I went into some detail about it. Well, Stephen A. Smith, the day after the national championship game, on First Take this morning, lost his discipline and issued a couple of responses, or took a couple of pot shots at me. I want to play the first one where he's talking to, I believe, Shannon Sharpe. Let's watch this clip.
I want to remind the world, this is Stephen A., baby. I'm not running from anybody. And if somebody is going to misquote me, usually I'm going to make an effort to set the record straight. Now, there are some people, as Shannon constantly reminds me, that deserve to be ignored. There are people in the media, fat bastards to be specific, who are completely irrelevant and are starving for attention because all they have left is clicks, because their credibility has been shredded everywhere else. And those people are left to be dealt with another day. So
that is Stephen A. On First Take, calling me fat bastard once again, talking with Shannon Sharpe. He's upset. He's originally talking about Draymond Green, and I believe he is suggesting that Draymond Green has taken him out of context in some criticism, and Stephen A. starts talking about, that he would. The back end of that clip that we didn't show you is he says that he would be willing to sit down and interview with people as long as they contextualized what he had to say properly. And so I think he's insinuating that Draymond Green has taken him out of context, and by lumping me in, fat bastard, he's saying that I've taken him out of context, and he's also trying to say to people that I'm going to ignore Jason Whitlock because Shannon Sharpe and the people at ESPN have said, hey, man, Whitlock's way outside your weight class. Don't fight him. But Stephen A., loves to do this tough guy routine. Stephen A., I'm not afraid of anybody. I'm from Hollis, Queens. And so that's Stephen A. posturing as a tough guy and justifying why I'm not going to respond to the things Jason Whitlock is saying. This is a forced comment where, Stephen A. is frustrated because people over social media and other places are asking legitimate questions about, like, hey, man, Whitlock raises some interesting points about what was written in your alleged memoir. He then, at another point in the conversation, cries on Molly Karam's shoulder this morning. Play the clip.
One other thing, there are people out there lying and actually putting out there that I didn't write my book. I can assure you, so help me God, I wrote my book. It's my memoir. It's my life story. I wasn't leaving that in the hands of other people.
Would you ignore people? You wrote for a living. You were a columnist for many years. Don't even don't even acknowledge
No, I'm just saying.
that.
I'm just saying. You just.
You're better than that. Let's go.
Let's go. No, you can acknowledge it. It's okay. You just point out how they're lying.
And I know exactly who you're talking about. But why does it bother him? You're not going to buy the book. You're not going to read the book. So why do you care? You spend so much time. People spend so much time worrying about other people and what they're doing in their lives. If you realize how little people actually cared about you, you start worrying about them.
Yeah. Listen, people lie about me all the time. I like God.
So at some, Molly throws in, she lets God fight her battles, and Stephen A. did as well. Shannon, I would like to correct you. I did buy the book. I did read the book. I've read books and done review of books throughout my career as a journalist. And so I understand that a lot of these ex-athletes that have success in the media don't understand journalism and don't understand what journalists do. But the reality is, as I pointed out to you guys on the show last week, it's like when Selena Roberts wrote a bad book on Alex Rodriguez, I reviewed it and reviewed her and had questions about what her motivations were. Selena Roberts, a white woman for the New York Times, again, punch in my name and Selena Roberts into Google, and you will see people complain about, why is Whitlock attacking Selena Roberts? And Selena Roberts said that, homophobia was the reason I was attacking her. No, I was attacking the trash book she wrote. And keep in mind, and I had previously attacked her for the trash column she wrote about the Duke lacrosse situation. I pointed all of this out. These people don't understand journalism. And then last week I pointed out about Joe Posnanski, who was a colleague of mine at the Kansas City Star, white dude, that I worked with he wrote a trash book on Joe Paterno. I wrote a column trashing his book on Joe Paterno. It's one of the might be in the top 20 of the most infamous columns I ever wrote. People, the Columbia Journalism Review called it one of the best pieces of writing of 2012. That's what I do. I'm a journalist. I read books, I review them, prominent figures in the sports landscape. I review, talk about what it is they do and are doing or have done, or, call into question questionable things they may do, or I may praise them, as I have done the last couple of weeks about Shannon Sharpe's Club Shay Shay show. Again, everybody knows I don't like Shannon Sharpe, but have I not said here and just authentically like, man, what this dude's doing with Club Shay Shay, that's the real deal. That's a good show that's going to be successful, and it's far better than what he was doing at FS1 working opposite Skip Bayless. I've done nothing but salute that. And like his Cat Williams interview, even though obviously it was Cat Williams who was the star of that, but just for Shannon to even create that environment where that could take place, hats off to Shannon. Again, I've reviewed Shannon's work, and I've said, like, dude, this guy's going to turn into the most important person in sports media. The person with that title at the moment is Stephen A. Smith. And the Cat Williams interview made me go, how? How did this happen? How did someone with such limited ability as a writer, and anybody that knows anything about Stephen A. Smith as a writer, as a journalist, knows, whoa, how did he become the face of sports media? And then I thought about Cat Williams, like, oh, these people are installed. And then I remembered, because when Stephen A. several months ago started in with this calling me fat bastard, I was like, okay, let me take a deeper dive. Let me take a look at who Stephen A. Smith is. Why does this dude think he can call me out of my name and run around like Mr. Tough Guy, and he wants the smoke? Let me see what he's standing on. So I read his memoir. And when I read his memoir, it was laughable. The exaggerations, the things said in there, the things that could, just as a journalist, don't pass the smell test, were enormous and plastered all throughout the book. And that's why I call him Stephen A. Myth. And that's why I question the little Wilt Chamberlain photo that Winston-Salem State and ESPN run out there every year trying to justify Stephen A. Smith's college basketball career. And so, I want to walk you through, at this point, why this is important. Let's go a step deeper, because right now, you're probably, some of you, the groupies out there, are the simple-minded, or just the people that just don't understand. Like, why is this important? Stephen A. is just a talk show host. Why is Whitlock talking about this? This has to be personal. He must have a vendetta against Stephen A. Smith. He's making a molehill into a mountain. I want to give you the context so you can understand what Cat Williams is saying and what I'm saying about why everybody is so misinformed. And so I want to play you a clip that we've shown here before on this show about Dan Rather. Dan Rather, the news broadcaster for 30, 40 years. I believe Dan was with CBS, or maybe he was with NBC. I can't remember. But Dan Rather became the next iteration of Walter Cronkite, the television news source that you could trust, the most trusted voice in news TV. And how? How did he get there? And again, this is following the Cat Williams deal, like of, hey, look, all these people are installed, that they're all controlled, that they all must preach and say the same things and support whatever the regime, whatever the government, whatever the FBI, CIA, whatever they're pushing out. And so I wanted to walk you back to Dan Rather before he was Dan Rather, the national television newscaster. He was a television reporter in Dallas, a Cub reporter in Dallas. in 1963 when President Kennedy got assassinated in front of everybody standing on the street in Dallas. And then there was a little dude named Andrew Zapruder, or I can't remember Zapruder's first name, but he shot the Zapruder film that was Abraham Zapruder, who captured what happened to John F. Kennedy in that car on that day. And so this is Dan Rather when he's a young TV reporter. And they because the Zapruder film was a secret for many years. People knew about it, but they didn't show the public. And so they needed some reporter willing to go on national TV and lie about what the Zapruder film depicted. And Dan Rather either raised his hand and volunteered, or they recruited Dan Rather to go on national TV and promote a lie. And so here's Dan Rather in 1963, I believe, talking about the Zapruder film and what it showed.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
So up in the corner, didn't that say November 25th, 1963? I believe that's what it said. So this is in November of 1963. He's on national TV lying to everybody about the Zapruder film and what actually happened to John Kennedy months earlier getting assassinated. And so Dan Rather, by promoting that lie, sets the stage for him to be installed, in my opinion, in the narrative of Cat Williams, as the voice of news TV, as the heir to Walter Cronkite's throne. And so, just for clarity, there may be a handful of you that have never seen the Zapruder film, but I want to play you a mashup of Dan Rather talking and then what actually happened to President Kennedy. Play the clip.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Who watches the Zapruder film and says you can see his head go violently forward when it's anybody with a pair can see his head go violently backwards? The reason why he says that is because they're selling the myth that from behind, Lee Harvey Oswald in a building in the book depository has shot the president from behind, forcing his head to go forward. So Dan Rather is on TV lying. He's taken the deal. He's going to make millions of dollars because he's willing to say whatever the regime and the powerful want him to say on national TV. He's willing to mislead the public. And so what they established with Dan Rather and what happened with his career and all the millions of dollars that he made and all the celebrity and fame and adoration and respect that he gained from telling a lie in 1963 and then accepting all the fame, the jobs, the opportunity, the millions of dollars to go on TV and say whatever they tell him to say. That is the pattern that is played out that Cat Williams is talking about, that now they do it in comedy. And now I'm saying they've even done it in the sports media. And there's a reason they've done it in the sports media, because the sports media is the place. It's now the only gathering spot on TV where all of America comes together and watches these sporting events and talks about these sporting events. And so now it's critically important to have people in place who are willing to promote whatever the regime wants promoted, who are willing to, if the regime decides like, hey, we're tired of the patriarchy. We're tired of masculine men. We want a more feminized version of men. Well, how do you feminize men? How do you get them to accept going against their natural instincts? How do you get them to normalize tapping into their emotions constantly, like a woman? How do you get them to abandon reason and logic and see manliness and masculinity as a willingness to publicly display their feminine emotion at any time? So you take someone like Stephen A. Smith, an actor, an exaggerator, perhaps a pathological liar, and you establish him as the voice and the face of the sports media. And everybody gets to watch and say, well, hold on, look at this guy. He could barely write. He doesn't know sports. He'll go on TV and say, hey, they should kick a field goal on third down just in case they miss it. They can re-kick it on fourth down. He'll go on TV and say, hey, tonight's game, this tight end for the Chargers is going to be critical for tonight's game against the Chiefs, even though that tight end plays for another NFL team. He'll go on TV and accuse BYU students of being racist because someone's auntie said over Twitter that my niece had racial slurs yelled at her by BYU students. See, that's not a journalist that would do that. That would go on TV and tell that Duke volleyball story of, I think the woman's name was Rachel Richardson or whatever. A journalist would never say, well, her auntie said it happened on Twitter, so therefore it happened. I'm going to take that to national TV and I'm going to demonize BYU. A journalist wouldn't do that. A journalist said, I need more proof, evidence before I'm ever just going to go out here and smear a university, a student body, or any kid. But ESPN has installed him as the face of sports journalism. And there are no journalistic rules or standards applied to Stephen A. Smith, and everybody can see it. And so everybody falls in line and says, well, how did Stephen A. get in this position? He's making $10, $12, $13 million a year. How can I get some of that? And the message from Stephen A. is, do what they tell you to do. If they want you to promote racial division, if they want you to promote a more feminized version of male masculinity, do it. There's a big check for it. And so that's how you go from playing in an NFL locker room, playing in a college football locker room, playing in and enjoying one of the most politically incorrect places on the planet, a male locker room, a football locker room, where you enjoyed and all your greatest memories are with your teammates and all the politically incorrect things you said, did, laughed at. But that's how you go from that to sitting on national TV crying because George Floyd overdosed on fentanyl and spent his life as a career criminal. You go on TV and cry as if, oh, you're heartbroken. Oh, George Floyd. That's how you go on TV and allegedly a white woman you don't know in a car in a fast food drive-through calls your son a name and you go on TV and cry about it. Like, oh my God, some white woman that I don't even know who she is. She called my son a name. And you cry about it. And I've lived long enough to know that there was a time when crying is not what men did when they were called names. Not real men. They bowed their back up I've told you this story. I'm not bragging. I know sometimes people are upset when I personalize these stories, but all I can tell you is about my life and what I've experienced. But Ryan Clark telling that story about his son, it reminds me like, well, hold on, man. Now, I can remember me and my boy, we're at Ball State and some townies drove by and dropped the N-bomb on us. And we hopped out of his car, backs bowled up, screaming at them to come back because we wanted to fight. Neither one of us thought, oh, God, I'm going to cry. I mean, we hopped out of the car wanting to fight. Now, it escalated and got out of control because, as I said, my friend, next thing I know, he done popped the trunk of his car, and he's standing next to me. I didn't know this. I've told this story, but he's standing next to me holding a Uzi. I'm like, holy cow. And that is when I did become a chicken, and I ran home. I ran to my house. But that's how we go from, oh, someone called me a racial slur, let's fight, to I'll show them, to let me go on national TV and cry about it. That's how we go from the incredibly disrespectful jokes we would crack on each other and say in a locker room to Randy Moss sitting on TV crying because in a private email to John Gruden, in a private email to a friend of his, talks about how big or rubbery DeMaurice Smith's lips are. So John Gruden is emailing a friend of his, not DeMaurice Smith, but a friend of his, where he makes a passing comment about DeMaurice Smith having rubbery lips. And Randy Moss, just hearing about the email exchange, is on national TV crying. How does this happen? Because they set up a plant, a symbol of like, this is the kind of man we want. We want a man controlled by emotions and an illogical person willing to do and say whatever we want. And there's rewards, financial rewards for you going along with the programming. That's how you end up with Kirk Herbstreit, Ryan Clark, and Randy Moss on ESPN, all within a year span, crying. Play the clip.
And so you can't relate to that if you're white, but you can listen and you can try to help, because this is not okay. It's just not.
Thank you for everybody that reached out to me. And like, I know it's getting better, but it's not better yet, and better for everybody. And you know, like, we just got to keep, staying together, man, and just doing what we can.
And for us to be moving back and not forward in 21st century, like I said, man, National Football League, this hurts me. The clock is ticking, man. I'm sorry.
The clock is ticking, man. I'm sorry. There's a process to getting us here. There's a process to emasculating men. And Stephen A. is part of that process. He's been chosen. And that's why, again, when they need certain things said, he's willing to say them. If they need someone to go on TV and promote the vaccine, Stephen A., ready for duty, sir. Black people aren't taking the vaccine. Let me show up on national TV, and let me get my bearings here. It's SOT number 5. I'm a little early on this one, but SOT number 5. This is Stephen A. Smith reporting for duty. They need someone to convince black people to take the vaccine. Stephen A. Smith reporting for duty. Play the clip.
Let me be very clear about something. I fully understand where LeBron James is coming from, right there. And I respect that man immensely for what he had to say. Because we know the shameful history this nation has with what was essentially medical experimentation on black folks. I understand wanting to keep medical issues private. I was right there with LeBron on this. But let me be straight with you about something. In the interest of full disclosure, after long, hard thought spanning the last few months, I've decided I am getting the COVID-19 vaccine. And I'm doing it today, this very day, right after I'm done taping this show. And here's why. COVID-19 has killed more than 525,000 people in the United States of America. More than 2.6 million people worldwide. It's hard to even comprehend the enormity of those numbers. Yet the virus has been especially brutal to my community, with data showing Black Americans being far more likely to get infected, get hospitalized, and yes, even die from COVID-19. And now the data shows Black Americans are not getting the vaccine, at least not at the same rate as other communities. Just in Philadelphia, where Rite Aid pharmacies are distributing the vaccine, 87% of vaccinations so far have gone to white folks, reportedly, yet just 4% to blacks. In a city with a 40% black population, or I should say 40+%. It's like that all across the country, by the way. I personally drove by the Jacob Javits Center in New York City this past weekend. It's a vaccination center. I saw what looked to be at least 1,000 people standing in line. Maybe 10 to 20 of them were black. This COVID pandemic and its impact on the African American community has made me rethink the hesitation I once had.
So I want you to understand what I'm saying. And it's not hard to follow, and I don't want to talk down, but just in case anybody's missing it. Dan Rather, the people in power, had a lie they wanted to tell about the assassination of a U.S. president. Dan Rather, here's your 30 pieces of silver and a 40-year TV career if you go out here and promote the lie that Lee Harvey Oswald did this and shot the man in the back of the head and caused his head to go forward. The same thing is playing out now, not just in the news media, because everything has become political. And now the sports media is caught up in politics. And so they need someone willing to say whatever they want. Someone they control, someone willing to take the same deal Dan Rather took in 1963. They need someone to take that deal right now. And Stephen A. Smith took it. That's my interpretation of his career and how he became the face of sports media, because they need a Negro wrangler, an overseer over black thought and over the thoughts of black men in the sports media world. They need black men modeling an illogical, emotional, feminized mentality. And the best way to do that is through sports. And so in order, Kyrie, he won't take the vaccine? Stephen A., go give that man 20 lashes. Kyrie Irving, oh, you tweeted out a movie poster that secular Jews didn't like? Get Stephen A. in here. Stephen A., go give Kyrie 20 lashes. We don't approve of that movie, that documentary. Run out there and give him 20 lashes. That's what Stephen A. does. He took the deal. They've illegal immigration. Something that is destroying all of America, but is putting black people at most harm. We're giving up our political leverage as Joe Biden and the left allow every illegal immigrant in the world to walk into our country. They're disenfranchising all American citizens. But primarily, who's catching most of this? Black people. We're being disenfranchised by illegal immigration. You know who will go out and sell illegal immigration as a positive? Superman, Stephen A. Smith. He'll sell COVID vaccines. He'll sell illegal immigrations. If the secular Jews say, hey, buddy, we don't like this documentary, go beat up Kyrie Irving, I'm on the case, boss. And so I get, many of you have fallen for the programming and, oh, Jason Whitlock, he criticizes LeBron James and Deion Sanders. That's the sellout. Telling you to take the COVID vaccine, telling you to get on board with illegal immigration, telling you that, oh my God, you better not retweet a movie poster we don't like. I'm not down with any of it. Never have been. Defended Kyrie Irving day one. Day one on both things. Defended Aaron Rodgers for not taking the vax. Told everybody, I don't care, y'all don't like me because Hebrews to Negroes offends you. I watched the documentary, as much of it as I could, and I told you it was boring, but it was certainly harmless. And I certainly wasn't going to run out here as a black man and be like, oh God, this is a bridge too far. There are black people that think they're Jews. I'm supposed to be angry. I'm not angry. People can think whatever they want. They have a right to think that. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to believe it, but they have a right to think that. And if they want to put out documentaries that suggest that, more power to them. This is America. People are free to think whatever they want. So, how do we get to, and I'm going to circle back and bring in, I want to get to this book that Stephen A. Smith has written that is just filled with farcical fantasies. And he's always on message. He's always, if you really read the book, The Straight Shooter or whatever, if you read the book, you can see Stephen A. always circles back to the right message. He, out of nowhere, early in the book, he goes on some long diatribe, anti-Donald Trump diatribe. And it's just out of nowhere. I'm like, well, I thought I was reading a book about Stephen A. Smith. Why is he just out of nowhere killing Trump? This doesn't advance the narrative. But there's a profile of the type of person who's willing to say anything for a check, who's willing to pass along misinformation, bad information, lying information for a check. There's a profile of the type of person that joke writers would say, hey man, you can fill in for Jimmy Kimmel or whoever is Stephen A. Jimmy Fallon. I can't remember who he filled in for, but you know what? You got to crack these jokes like that ivermectin is for horses and that human beings shouldn't take ivermectin. Stephen A. did that because the check was good and the attention was good and he just wants to be famous and he doesn't care about the truth. And that's why it's like, how are you the face of journalism when you don't care about the truth? It's got to be an install. It's got to be a plant. And so that's why when I'm reading his book, I'm just looking at things and I'm just laughing like, he really told this story? And we're really supposed to believe it? And I did suggest, I was like, did he have ghostwriters? Who wrote this book? Because it's hard for me to believe that a sports writer, anybody familiar with the sports world, would unpack these stories the way Stephen A. Smith unpacks these stories in his book. It reads like it's someone who has zero connection to the sports world. And then I go look and just like, well, what has Stephen A. been saying in interviews? How does he unpack any of this stuff in interviews? And I'm just, he can, as it relates, these is just simple stuff because, again, Stephen A.'s job is to be a Negro wrangler and to get to herd athletes and other black men in the direction the regime wants them to go. And so that's why this whole athletic career thing is important. And this is why Stephen A. runs around promoting the myth that he was some sort of high caliber athlete. And there's just very little evidence of Stephen A. being any type of athlete at any point in his life. Anybody that's seen him throw out the first pitch at a Yankees game or whatever, like, whoa, this dude says he was an athlete? And so this whole selling of Stephen A. Smith, oh, he played basketball at Winston-Salem State, and he got a full ride basketball scholarship to Winston-Salem State. And you read the book and you just go, well, hold on, man. You're saying that you were only on your high school basketball team for a month or two as a senior. You got cut from the team your junior year, and you tell some farcical story about a tryout day in high school, and you got put on varsity on the spot because you in some one-on-one game you beat up Franklin Smith. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I just want to show you Stephen A. Smith in his own words trying to keep his story straight as it relates to his alleged basketball career at Winston-Salem State. In, I believe, November of 2022, Malika Andrews, Jalen Rose, and J.J. Redick were on ESPN. And Malika Andrews and Jalen and the producers at ESPN were having a little fun with Stephen A. Smith. And they put together a graphic of everybody's basketball average, their stats, their senior year. There's Jalen Rose averaging 17, 18 points a game. There's J.J. Redick averaging 24, 25 points a game. And then they show Stephen A. Smith averaging 1.5 points a game. Watch the clip, and then let me explain to you what you're actually watching.
We're coming off college hoops, guys. Yeah. So I do want to show you all a little something. I got a little something to show you here. Before we dig into the NBA, take a look at this blind resume here. It's 3 players, their scoring average in each person's final college season. Do we have any guesses who this might be? Jalen, who do you think? What is this?
Nah, this is hilarious. JJ's on the right.
It's our starting lineup from tonight.
Well, they're not telling us I only played one game because I cracked my kneecap in half, but that's neither here nor there.
That is neither here.
So, and I explained this to you last week, but I'm just reiterating. The man just argued on national TV on ESPN with his stats up there saying he averaged 1.5 points per game. Stephen A. Smith says, what they're not telling you is I only played one game. You can't average 1.5 points in one game. It's impossible. And I'm not a math major, but it's impossible. So that's in November of 2022. Stephen A. trying to explain his basketball career at Winston-Salem State. He then, I think, circles back in August of 23 and has a new explanation. This isn't on ESPN. This is on his podcast. He has a new explanation for his basketball career and his poor stats at Winston-Salem State. Play the clip.
Let's get the basketball stuff out of the way. I'm sick and tired of people lying about my basketball resume. Ladies and gentlemen, when I say that I wasn't great, I'm talking about compared to greatness. I was good enough to get a basketball scholarship. I was good enough to get my education paid for with 2 bad knees. They talk about I averaged 1.5 points a game. I saw some article on social media. That's a lie. It was less. See that? You didn't know I was going to say that, did you? It was less than that. It's a lie. How about 0? Because I never played, because I cracked my kneecap in half. I got operated on at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My mama was by my bedside. My sisters came to see me. They said I'd never walk straight again. My bone cracked in half my first year at Winston-Salem State. I still have those knee pains to this very day. Still. In the knee that still has a 6-inch screw in it that I never took out. And in the left knee, because I spent years overcompensating for the pain in the right knee. You didn't know that, did you? Did you? You want to sit up there and think, I just ride the bench. I couldn't play. Ask people who played against me whether or not I could play.
There's a lot going on there. A lot going on. Now, I'm... 300 pounds. It would be hard to get a 6-inch screw in my knee. Stephen A. Smith, 160, 170 pounds, 6'1". He's got a 6-inch screw in his knee? 6 inches? In his knee? I'm going to say something really politically incorrect, and I apologize, but it's what came to my head. I apologize to my Christian viewers. Does he have a vagina in his knee? Because I just don't, I can't, the math ain't mathing. None of the math is mathing. The 1.5 points per game in one game that he lied and said about, and now he's blaming social media and other people for telling that lie. And to now, I played 0 games and I scored 0 points because I cracked my knee in half. And his explanation of how he cracked his knee in half in his book, in his own words, is farcical. The math isn't mathing. And then, being a bit of a journalist, and I showed you all this. Do we have the stat sheet from the 1991, the 90-91 Winston-Salem State Rams? In bold, in yellow, there's a Stephen Smith listed on the stat sheet. And it's also, I think this is maybe out of their yearbook or out of some program, game day program that Winston-Salem State had, but there's an NCAA website, archive website, that also lists a Stephen Smith on the Winston-Salem State team in 91. That stat sheet either has 9 or 10 games listed for that Stephen Smith. But I would assume this is the stat sheet that provoked ESPN to put up that graphic. This 9 games on the stat sheet. Now he's saying he played no games and it's all a lie. What is it? And what type of pathological exaggerator or liar can't keep a story straight about a college basketball career that they talk about constantly? That they've gone back to Winston-Salem State's campus to celebrate him. And they keep promoting the Wilt Chamberlain photo, the headshot of Stephen A. Smith as this is all we can get of proof of Stephen A. And there's another headshot similar to that one, but there's two different little headshots like that they keep promoting as proof of Stephen A. Smith's college basketball career. And there are stats saying that a Stephen Smith was on the team. Stephen A. has just disavowed those stats on camera in 2023. That ain't me is what he's saying. And whoever put me on that stat sheet is lying because I only played 0 games. And you wonder why he got installed. The truth is not important to him. He's very comfortable lying, exaggerating, misleading. Just go look at his own narrative. And then last week I showed you all, this is like a 2-minute clip of one of the times the First Take show went and visited the Winston-Salem State campus to honor Stephen A. Smith. And they whip out the Wilt Chamberlain photo and they bring out a handful of Stephen A. Smith's teammates. Woo, this is, let's play SOT 13. Play the clip.
I've been working with Stephen A. almost 5 years. You know, he's pretty big time. He's the star, the alpha, but I really wonder what he was like in college, and that's why we just surprised him. Let's throw it over to Stephen A. Can you please introduce your longtime friends and teammates?
Well, first of all, you ain't gonna find out too much because each and every one of these boys know better than talking about me publicly like this, okay? So you better mind your manners. Don't be telling all the secrets, all right? These are my teammates from Winston-Salem State, a few of them from the basketball team at Winston-Salem State. Pretty boy Phil Hayes is the one here right now. What's up, Phil?
What's good, Steve? Congratulations, brother. I'm proud of you, man.
How is it that after all of these years, you still look the same?
It's living in the Hamptons, baby.
He's a model, too. This is ridiculous, man. Bye, man. My man, Phil Hayes. Appreciate you. Love your boy. Monte Ross, former assistant coach at St. Joe's, former head coach at Delaware. I don't want to tell your business. I can tell now where you're going to be at. Temple University, you're going to be assistant coach at Temple University back in the... What's going on, Mom?
What's going on, Steve? What's going on, man? How you doing?
So you didn't think to tell me about this? You wanted to surprise you? What were you trying to say to the people?
I was sworn to secrecy, and I think we got you.
You did get me. You did get me. Oh, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you, too. What Temple going to do this year?
We'll be all right. We'll be all right. As long as the coaches stay out of the way, we'll be all right.
Aaron McKee texted me earlier today, head coach for Temple. He texted me earlier. I should have known you were here because he texted me.
Well, you know, he's a social media genius just like yourself, so I'm not surprised.
Still a politician after all of these years. Thanks a lot, baby. Appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy right here, his name is Gary Stevens. We know him as Spank. I despise this man's laugh, okay? Him and this guy right here, Mark Turner, once collaborated with each other to put on some old zoot suit my father had sent me to college with and walked around campus imitating me with the suit on. This is what I had to go through when I was a youngster. What's up, Spank?
What's going on, bro? How you doing?
You didn't think to tell me either?
Nah, we was on the phone, Sunday for like an hour, right?
That's right. And you didn't tell me a word.
I was sworn to secrecy, as Ma said, man. That was our job. We did a good job, right?
I'll deal with you later.
Yeah.
So, and there were other teammates that Stephen A. engaged with. I'm stopping it there for a couple of reasons. Obviously, if you're looking like Stephen A. is towering over those first three guys. Stephen A. Smith is 6'1". I've stood next to him. I've known him for a number of years. Stephen A. is 6'1". First guy, Phil Hayes, standing next to Stephen A. Maybe he's 5'8". I don't 5'9", maybe. There's a Phil Hayes listed in the programs back in those days and the stat sheets and leave that image up for a while because I think Phil Hayes may be the guy on the far left or as it relates to, far left as it relates but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Phil Hayes is the second guy in the black suit next to Stephen A. Gary Stevens is the guy to the right of Stephen A. Smith. But Phil Hayes, I believe, is listed as 6 foot back in the old Winston-Salem State programs. That Stephen A. 6'1", that looks 3-4 inches discrepancy. I don't know. Stephen A. played on one of the shortest basketball teams and has the shortest basketball teammates. And the Gary Stevens is perhaps the most interesting of all these people. And that's the guy. He's on Stephen A. Smith's left shoulder. I believe he's on the right-hand side of the screen. Gary Stevens runs around with Stephen A. Smith to this day. Flies out with Stephen A. everywhere. He is allegedly one of, he's Spank, he's Stephen A.'s good friend, and the only reference I could find, before I go further, the Monte Ross, he's legitimate. He's mentioned in Big House Gaines' book as someone Big House had a lot of respect for. He's a coach now. I think he's a head coach maybe at North Carolina Central or whatever. He's involved in college basketball. He was an assistant coach at Temple. There are a handful of stats. He legitimately played at Winston-Salem State. I think Phil Hayes has a stat or two, but he's supposed to be some 6 foot guy. Stephen A's towering over him. That guy looks 5'8", 5'9". And then the Gary Stevens. Again, this is the guy that runs around the country as Stephen A's former college teammate. I found a newspaper article that referenced Gary Stevens. I believe it's in 1989, July 23rd, the 1989 Winston-Salem Journal. And do we have that image? I think I sent it to y'all and asked y'all to get a screen grab on it. But you can look it up on newspaper.com or anywhere. Gary Stevens is mentioned at the end of this article as a 6'3" guard from Englewood, New Jersey. It's at the very end. He's in yellow. 6'3" guard from Englewood, New Jersey. That guy standing next to Stephen A. Smith is not 6'3". Looks to be 5'8", 5'9". He's pictured all over social media with Stephen A. Smith. I don't have an explanation for any of this or any of that. It's just weird. And furthermore, I found information about Gary Stevens, and this Gary Stevens, the guy that's over social media and traveling around, where he played at some New York school, Old Westbury, not at Winston-Salem State. You can't find Gary Stevens on the registrar at Winston-Salem State. You can't find any stats other than this mentioned in this article. And perhaps Gary Stevens was a guy that had said to somebody, hey, I'm 6'3" and I'm coming up to Winston-Salem State, and Big House Gaines lays eyes on him and say, hey, man, you're not 6'3". You're 5'9", 5'8". And maybe that was the end of his college basketball career at Winston-Salem State. But I can't find pictures of him on the team. They haven't put together a Wilt Chamberlain-like photo of Gary Stevens. When we called the registrar, they could never find a Gary Stevens that was registered at Winston-Salem State. Maybe I haven't done the appropriate amount of research, but this guy seems like a total mystery. And I don't get it. It doesn't add up. So I want to. Stephen A. is upset and he's being taken out of context. I think he's talking about Draymond Green, but let's say he's talking about me. And so I want to play some of these clips of Stephen A. in his own words, describing his basketball experience and other stories related to Stephen A. I want to start with SOT 15. This is, I believe, Stephen A. sitting down on the Rap Radar podcast, I believe. Let's play that clip first.
I'm an alumnus of Delaware State University.
All right.
Why did you decide to go to Winston-Salem State?
Well, basketball scholarship.
Okay.
I believe it or not, I went to FIT, Fashion Institute here at Technology.
I saw that.
Actually,
I
went
saw
to
that.
the same high school.
Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison in
Absolutely.
Queens.
No doubt about it.
baby.
Electrical installation in the house.
Yes.
I didn't do that great. Thank God thank God I didn't burn somebody's house down. But the thing is that while I was at Thomas, not at Thomas Edison, after I graduated from Thomas Edison, coming out of high school, I was like 5'9", 130 pounds, man. I was small at times, but I could really shoot the rock.
Get to the hoop.
So I wasn't getting scholarship offers, obviously, but FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, everybody used to laugh about that. But I had two advantages, okay? Number one, the basketball team was really the only male population in the school.
Ooh, some cuties,
Everyone else was either female or they were homosexuals, not interested in the females. So that left the females to the basketball team. So we were in a very, very good place. Okay? And last but not least, it was junior college and we were ranked 15th in the nation.
Yeah.
And so the year I was there, we were 35-4. We were doing our thing and what have you. And then a guy by the name of Howard Funny Kid, he used to play for Winston-Salem State in big house games in the 70s. He kept a good relationship with the coach, brought me down for a tryout. The coach put me on the basketball floor against the starters. I dropped 17 straight three-pointers.
Wow.
And he gave me a scholarship on the spot.
Damn.
Wow. And that's how I ended up in Winston-Salem State. That was my brightest moment, because from that point forward, I cracked my kneecap in half, and I was never the same, and that was that.
What do you think it's going to
So there's a couple of things, two or three things. One tiny. He calls Harold Kit, Howard there. Let's just say he screwed up. He's telling this story. He calls him Howard. His name's Harold. That's according to Stephen A.'s book and according to our research in terms of finding someone who played at Winston-Salem State. Stephen, that's small error. No big deal. But the 17 straight three-pointers in a tryout, and I've walked people through what he says in his book. These are the book that he says he wrote. It's his memoir. It's his story. The man says that in February of 1988, this Kit guy, Harold Kit, works him out and is so impressed in this one-on-one workout that the next weekend he drives Stephen A. from New York to North Carolina to try out for the Winston-Salem State basketball team. These are Stephen A. Smith's words in his own book. In February, on a playground outdoors in New York City, he does a tryout for Harold Kit or somebody, and Harold Kit then drives him the next weekend to Winston-Salem State. So February, or the first weekend in March, he drives to Winston-Salem for a tryout. College basketball teams in February, first week of March, they're still in season. Stephen A. writes in his book that they drive down on a Saturday and that on Sunday morning, he wakes up and then goes over to a basketball scrimmage that the team is having, and Big House Gaines, he shows up late. The scrimmage is going on, and Big House Gaines checks him in, and he hits 17 straight shots. Just think it through for those of you that know anything about sports. A college basketball team is wrapping up its season in February and the first week of March. They're playing games on Saturday. But on Sunday, they're holding a scrimmage that Stephen A. Smith shows up in the middle of, gets checked into the scrimmage, knocks down 17 straight three-pointers, and is given a scholarship on the spot to a small Division II historically black college with a tight budget. That's all over Big House Gaines' own book that was released in 2004. That purse strings were tight constantly. And somehow they gave Stephen A. Smith a scholarship on the spot because in one scrimmage on a Sunday, he hit 17 straight three-pointers. It doesn't make sense, not to anybody that knows anything about college athletics. And that's why I'm like, does Stephen A. know anything about college athletics? How does someone who would write this narrative arc, this story, how is someone that shallow, that little understanding of how college athletics even works, how does he become the face of sports media at ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports? Is he there because of his expertise, because of his experience, or is he there because he's willing to lie and exaggerate and tell farcical stories? How? Any NBA player, anybody that's played a lick of college sports, explain how you give that story as how you landed a basketball scholarship. Outdoor tryout in New York in February. Next weekend, tryout on Sunday with a college basketball team that's wrapping up its college basketball season. You get a scholarship on the spot. Make it make sense. The other thing I just want to add, again, Monte Ross mentioned in Big House Gaines' book. Stephen A. Smith not mentioned at all. Perhaps the most famous alum from Winston-Salem State, Big House Gaines doesn't reference him. And you can say, well, the book was written in 2004, and Stephen A. is far more famous now than he was then, but by the time that book was published, Stephen A. had been on CNN, SI, and on Fox Sports for 5 years. When I get to tell you these other Stephen A. Smith stories, it just does. Big House Gaines never mentions him in a book. He mentions thousands of people. Go read the index of all the people that's mentioned. But Stephen A. Smith, not even a sentence? Make it make sense. And keep it, Stephen A. claims father figure. So I want to play you, last point. Stephen A. Smith says, coming out of high school, he was 5'9", 130 pounds. 5'9", 130 pounds. You don't make the team as a junior in high school. You do make the team as a senior in high school. And so now he's 5'9", 130 pounds coming out of high school. Listen to this story he tells about his high school basketball tryout, and then tell me how it makes sense. This is SOT number 2, play it.
I'm quoting you from the book, that this became a kind of a guiding principle in your life. Before getting lost in the shuffle, toot your own horn.
Yeah.
Explain that.
I'm playing high school basketball, and I was not Michael Jordan, couldn't shine his shoes. Couldn't shine LeBron's shoes. Couldn't shine Allen Iverson's shoes on my best day. I'm not trying to pretend that I was that dude. But could I ball? Yes. And if you weren't a high caliber collegiate or professional athlete, chances are you went up against me, I would whip your ass. The flip side to it, however, was that I'm balling all over the school and going to different high schools. I went to Thomas Edison, Jamaica. High school was right across the street. Hillside High School was right down the block. Van Buren was up the road, and I'm going to all of these schools and the parks where all of these dudes play. And I'm doing my thing too. And then tryouts came, and I finally decided my junior year to try, because I never tried out my freshman or sophomore year. And it was this guy on the team that I couldn't stand. I didn't like him as a person. He didn't like me. But he was on the team. And he was this light-skinned dude. His name was Franklin Williams. He was about 6'2", 6'3", about 210 pounds. And he could really ball, but he couldn't shoot like me. He wasn't fast as me. He just had a really big backside. He was a wide body, and he knew how to use it, And so I went into the tryouts looking forward to it, and everybody was looking forward to it as well. And what he did was he got one of his boys along with him to double team me. So they would shield me from getting the basketball, or even when I touched the basketball, it was two dudes on me, so I had to give it up. Because I had to do that, the coach was Harvey Stoller. That was his name. And he didn't know what the hell was going on. He didn't know me from a can of paint. So he was like, he's looking at the best players out there that are making noise, making a difference. And I wasn't one of them. And I got cut. And I was furious because I knew that I wasn't dealt a fair shake because of what Franklin had pulled off. So I walked around with animosity for months. And I told him, I said, every chance I get, I don't care how good you are, I said, every chance I get, excuse my language, I said, every chance I get, I said, I'm gonna bust your ass, right? And so, smartly for him, when we played in the back of the school, he would never show. He didn't have to, because he was on the basketball team already. I wasn't. So you're on the varsity, you don't need to play, pick up basketball with somebody that didn't even make the team or whatever. But I was just on this mission, and I told everybody, and I made sure everybody spread the word of what he did to me, because it was my way of trying to call him out. And then cats that agreed with him, we would step outside in the back of the school to play ball, and I'd smoke all of them day after day after day. And I remember it was like a string. It was like a span of 6 consecutive months, 7 days a week, 6 consecutive months. I never failed to take less than 300 jump shots a day. And it got to a point where I was just in the park and I was closing my eyes and hitting 25, 30-foot jump shots. I was just ready. I wanted him so bad. And then the next semester came around, and it was a month before tryouts. And the coach, Harvey Stoller, who was teaching at John Bound High School, but he was coaching at Thomas Edison, he was in his office getting ready to conduct tryouts. A week before tryouts, I made a beeline to his office, and I said, "You don't know me. My name is Stephen Smith." I said, "I just want to take 2 minutes of your time. I want to make this team. I want to earn it." I said, "But I want you to know what happened to me last year." And I told him what happened. And I said, "All I ask is for 2 things." I said, number 1, I said, remember me, because I'm going to see to it when I get on the court next week and show you. And then I said, number 2, after I bust all ass, I said, and I'm not going to lie, those are the exact words I used to him. That's why I said that. I said, after I do that, I said, I only have one favor. I said, you have a guy on this team, and I gave him that guy's name, and I said, I want him on the court against me, just so I could solidify my point. And that next week, I went to that tryout. I hit everything. I mean, they just couldn't stop me. It was money. And once I did that, I went and I hit, like, because you had these games and it would go up to like 10 or 12 or whatever. And I hit the game winner. And I grabbed the bat. After I hit the game winner, I grabbed the basketball and I walked to midcourt and I put the basketball on midcourt. And everybody was looking at, like, what's going on, because tryouts were supposed to be over. And Harvey Stoller looked over at Franklin Williams. He said, "That's for you. Get out there." And he put him out there, and I bust his ass. And after that, the coach said, "I guess that settles that. Welcome to the varsity squad."
So he's speaking in front of an audience there, obviously. And audiences are gullible, the interviewer is gullible, and so a round of applause for a farcical story. High school basketball tryouts. And Stephen A. and I are the same age. Yes, I grew up in Indiana. He grew up in New York. They're not one-day affairs. There's not one big scrimmage and then a one-on-one matchup, and then, boom, they decide who's on the team. High school, we got a kid that is an associate producer, works the cameras for us, pretty good high school basketball player, I believe, in Oklahoma. Luke, help me out here. You're young, you're just 19, 20 years old, but and maybe things have changed, is a high school basketball tryout a one-day event? Yeah, okay. He just confirmed what it's 2 weeks. And so nothing's changed from my day in terms of like, there is no one-day scrimmage and one-on-one deal and boom, I'm on the team. These stories are being told by someone who doesn't have a fundamental understanding of sports. How did they get this job? Now, let me add on this layer. We just played you the clip where he says, coming out of high school, he was 5'9", 130 pounds. 5'9", 130 pounds. Franklin Williams, Stephen A. Smith says, is 6'2", 215 pounds. Is there a high school basketball coach in America that will, you know what, let me put Franklin Williams and Stephen A. in a one-on-one matchup. That will prove something. 5'9", 130, according to Stephen A. Smith. Franklin Williams, who I've been able to find old newspaper clippings about him making, scoring double-figure points and hitting key buckets to help Thomas Edison High School win games. I can't find Stephen Smith in any newspaper reports about Thomas Edison High School doing anything. Could not find it. I could find Franklin Williams. I could find some dude named Chris Roddick or Riddick. I could find Carl Weathers, or I believe is his name. I could find stories about Thomas Edison High School and the guys that Stephen A. Smith says he played with. Find stories about Harvey Stoller. Stephen A. Smith, nowhere to be found, but he's telling people at 5'9", 130 pounds, he's taking on 6'2", 215 experienced basketball players in one-on-one matchups, and he's busting their ass. Make it make sense. This is someone completely comfortable with lies and exaggerations. This is someone that if you listen to these stories, it's like, whoa, there's some major insecurity issues here. There's some major, mental issues perhaps here. What grown man that has made millions of dollars, has fame at Stephen A. Smith's level, is running around telling far-fetched tryout stories? That he made the high school basketball team off a one-day tryout and this incredible one-on-one performance against Franklin Williams and knocking down every shot in the scrimmage. And then he received a full basketball scholarship to Winston-Salem State after a one-day tryout where he makes 17 straight shots. This is the greatest tryout basketball player in the history of tryouts. Who does this? Think about what I told you about Dan Rather and what it is, their job. These people have to be very comfortable telling the biggest lies and the biggest exaggerations with a straight face. They're actors. There's a reason Stephen A. Smith is on General Hospital. They're plants and actors. They're comfortable going, JFK, his head went violently forward. When there's film that shows his head going violently backwards, they're comfortable doing that for the check. I want to play you Stephen A. This is a famous Stephen A. story about an article that he says he wrote about Big House Gaines when he was a member of the Winston-Salem State basketball team. Shot number 3, let's play it.
Got to tell you, Coach Gaines was sick. He was not healthy. And there had come points and times where he was literally coming to practice or to games with a patch over one of his eyes. I didn't know whether it was cerebral palsy or if it was something else. His children knew that, his family knew that better than me, and I don't want to speak out of turn to exactly what that illness was, but he was not healthy. And I got to a point where I was literally scared that he was going to drop dead while coaching a game. And I said to him, look, man, I plan on having a voice long after your career is over. I want to make sure you here to enjoy it. You know, I love you. I don't want something to happen to you. You kind of need to give this up. It's been almost 50 years, man. And he's like, F you. I don't want to hear that, you know, and told me he wasn't trying to hear it, wasn't trying to listen to it, anything like that. And then when he did that, I said, okay, well, you know I'm studying to be a journalist, and you know I'm writing for the school newspaper. I'm going to write this article on you. He said, yo, F you, man. Get the hell out of my office. And I said, don't say I didn't warn you. I said, now, if you tell me not to write it, I ain't going to write it. But if you tell me that you don't care, I'm going to write this. I'm going to write this article. And he said, I don't give a shit what you do. I said, no problem, fair enough. And I went and wrote it. And when I wrote it, oh my Lord, I was in Brown Hall dormitories. I was in Brown Hall, and it literally looked like a cemetery. I mean, you just saw dudes walking around. They looked at me, they just shook their head. You know, some of my teammates came into my room. I was in 211. My roommate was Mark Turner. It was Mark Turner. I had a crew of boys, my man Kevin Edwards and Boris Battle and Gary Stevens. I mean, I had all of these guys. Phil Hayes, Monte Ross, who's the assistant coach at Temple right now. You know, Monte wasn't there for this because he was away with his now wife. We knew she was going to be his wife long ago. You know, she'd come into town and we'd scatter like ants. You know what I mean? Like we didn't matter. She just looked at us like, y'all know what to do. Get the hell up out of here. I'm here now. You know, so we knew we didn't have any rights. We didn't see him. But when I wrote that article, they came in my room and they like, man, we just gonna pray for you, bro. You know, we don't know what the hell you were thinking. What were you thinking? And I was like, look, man, I'm studying to be a journalist. He told me it was all right. I told him to his face. He told me it was all right to write the column. The assistant coaches wanted me thrown off the team. The chancellor wanted me expelled. You know, he later denied that he didn't have any recall. I said, yeah, there's a lot of things you don't remember. You didn't remember when you were on a damn job, but that's a different subject for another day. So, you know, he said all of that, and it was like, hey, next thing I know, Coach Gaines shut everything down. He told everybody to shut up, fall back. He said he wants to be a journalist. He came to me, he looked me in my face, he told me what he felt, he told me why, and he said, if it's all right with you, Coach, I'm going to write this. He said, that's what you're supposed to do when you're aspiring to be what he's aspiring to be. Stand down, leave him alone. And that was that.
So, I'm a journalist. So I went to just like, hey, can we find this article that Stephen A. is talking about? Because a lot of things are on the internet. There's archives. There's just all kinds of stuff. And so the student newspaper at Winston-Salem State, back in Stephen A.'s day, I don't know what it is today, but back in Stephen A.'s day, it was a monthly newspaper. A monthly newspaper that came out 6, 7, 8 times a year. When school was in session, once a month, they would put out a newspaper. 16, 17, 18 pages, 18, it'd be an even number. And so I found these monthly newspapers online in an archive, and I read several, 6 to 8, maybe 10 Stephen A. Smith stories. He might write 2 stories in an edition of that paper. And so I found 6 to 10 of those stories. Only one could be the story that he's referencing. It came out in April of 1991. That makes sense, April. College basketball wraps up in March. And so in April, a guy under the byline, Stephen Smith, writes a summation of the 1990-91 season, which Stephen A. Smith, according to the stat sheet, or not Stephen A. Stephen Smith, according to the stat sheet, appeared in 9 games in that 90-91 season. And, is that Stephen A. Smith? I don't know. Stephen A. Smith, his own words, I've already shown you. He never played a game. This is what he says. He disputes what ESPN said. So I don't know who this Stephen Smith is on the stat sheet. Maybe it's him, maybe it's not. Who knows? Stephen A. Smith has said several different things. But this article does list Stephen Smith and, lists Stephen Smith, and it's under the headline, Rams basketball takes stock of 90-91 season. I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from the article. Here's how it begins, how the story begins. Coming into the 90-91 basketball season, the Rams, Winston-Salem State, had an awful lot to be optimistic about. They had improved tremendously after their 6-19 showing the year before. Several inside players were expected to fill the void left by the departures of Maurice Edwards and Toby Barber. Most importantly, 3 starters, along with several reserves, were expected to return, yet the Rams came up short, and once again, everyone is asking, what happened? That's paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2, C.E. Gaines, head coach of the Rams, was openly optimistic about this year's squad. He had every right to feel that way. The explosive scoring of Kevin Edwards and John Harden was instrumental in helping the Rams of WSU to their 9-3 Southern Division record last year. One could only hope that the acquisition of 7 junior college players would provide the Rams with what they needed to win a title. Many are wondering what happened. So what happened is his theme that he's going back to and references throughout the story. Midway through the story, he talks about there was maybe some dissension among the junior college players and the returning players. He quotes an anonymous player saying a lot of us felt Big House, he didn't use the word, he said he was putting us down because he had a new crop of junior college players coming in. We felt like we had something to prove. So the junior college players, to the junior college players and the coaching staff. Then he quotes Gaines saying, why he praised them. And then the story ends with this. This is the concluding paragraph. Whatever the case, the Rams haven't won a CIAA championship in 14 years. They were the last Southern Division team to accomplish that feat. If they hope to win anything in the near future, a change is necessary. Though there is speculation, no one knows where the change should take place. One thing's for certain, someone had better figure it out quickly, otherwise it will be 15 years since the Rams win a CIAA championship. As best I can tell, and I did the research and we looked, this is the smoking gun article where he called for Big House Gaines to retire, and this set the campus ablaze, and the chancellor wanted Stephen A. expelled from school, and the assistant coaches wanted Stephen A. kicked off the team because of this article. Really? And think it all the way through. Stephen A. Smith, according to Wikipedia, he graduated from Winston-Salem State in 1991. This is a summation of the 90-91 season. It's published in April of 1991. They want to kick Stephen A. Smith off the team after the basketball season? When he's on track to graduate? They want to expel him from school in April of 1991 at the end of a semester when he's on track to graduate? Make it make sense. I'm going to circle back to Dan Rather and the people that are installed. They're comfortable with bad information, exaggerated stories, outright lies. Think about the story. The eventual story at the end of Dan Rather's career. Didn't Dan Rather, or was it Brian Williams. Who was it that got busted for lying about being in a war zone? Or so, these guys that are Brian Williams. And it seems like Dan Rather was also involved in some controversy at the end of his career about information. These people aren't honest. And that's how they get these jobs. That's how they get these positions. It's why they're installed. Finally, I want to play one other clip. And this is Stephen A. Telling his story. Let's see if I can find the exact date. Did I remove Kendall or did I? Anyway, Stephen A. Smith, I'm going to play the clip and I'm going to look for this information. Stephen A. Smith tells a story about getting arrested, he says, outside of Detroit or leaving a basketball game, a Pistons basketball game, I believe in the 90s. I'm going to try to look this up, but listen to this story Stephen A. tells about getting arrested.
I remember I was in Detroit traveling back from a Pistons game at the Palace in Auburn Hills all the way to Romulus Marriott, about an hour away in Detroit near the airport. And I got pulled over by the cops, and I got surrounded by 8 cops. It was completely unnecessary, uncalled for. They grabbed me they told me to get out the car. Next thing you know, 3 different squad cars come, 2 in each car, 8 officers total. I had 2 white beat writers with me, all right, from competing papers. We were all driving back together. They handcuffed me. They put me in the squad car. They took me to the precinct in Troy, Michigan, and I was pissed. I don't know if I've ever been that furious. Because I thought it was so grossly unfair. And not only that, I knew I had paid the ticket, so it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And I was upset. And then ultimately I got out of jail after about 4 hours. Bail was $250. I had $241 cash, and they wouldn't let me out. Until a dear friend of mine who worked for CNN kept calling them every 5 minutes until they let me go. I was $9 short. I knew the district attorney in that town. I wanted folks arrested. I wanted folks in trouble, whatever. I called my mother. She said, but what did you do? So what are you talking about? I didn't do anything. She said, really? What did you do? I said, Mommy, I wasn't speeding. I didn't do anything. She said, you did nothing. You sure about that? And then I remembered I was going like 10 miles over the speed limit, A. And B, come to find out, I did pay the ticket, but I paid it late. And so it got there late, which means it was in a computer, but there was a late charge of $15 that I hadn't paid. Their system didn't tell them it was $15. They just said he's driving with a suspended license. So it turns out that I served time in jail for 4 hours in Troy, Michigan, because of a $15 late fee on a speeding ticket. And my mother said, if you had paid the ticket on time, you wouldn't have had that happen. That was my mother, period. She didn't want to hear excuses. She didn't want to hear anything. Yes, people are going to be unfair. Yes, people are going to be a little bit cruel. Yes, people are going to do this and they're going to do that. How are you going to overcome it? Because if I set the stage for you to have a crutch or an excuse to fall upon,
unbelievable.
What are you going to accomplish in life? That was my mother.
So, for those of you that have ever been arrested, and coincidentally, I've been arrested for driving on a suspended license. I believe it happened in the late 1980s, early 1990s. My memory's a bit fuzzy, whether I was in college or out of college. I think I was in college because I think I was driving that old beat-up Brown Fury I used to drive. I'm leaving my stepmother's house and visiting my stepmother and stepbrother and sister, and it's late at night, and cop pulled me over for no reason. But he pulled me over and asked for my ID. Sure enough, my license was suspended for an unpaid speeding ticket. And get out of the car, cuffed me, took me down to police station, booked me. It was just boom, 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 boom. No backup was necessary. And I probably spent 8-9 hours in jail before my dad, paid the $200, $300, $400 to bail me out or whatever. But I just want you to listen to what Stephen A. Smith is saying. that, keep in mind, Stephen A. Smith's always been a pretty fancy, nice dresser. He's leaving a Pistons basketball game. I believe, in my view, this is sometime in the 90s, the late 90s, when he's a beat writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer covering the Philadelphia 76ers. But I couldn't call up my Kindle because I'm terrible with my computer. But anyway, I believe it's in the late 1990s. He's saying that he's probably nicely dressed. There are 2 white coworkers or peers of his in the car with him. He gets pulled over for speeding, and they call for 8 police officers to surround him? Really? I mean, and again, that interview he's doing with Patrick Bet-David is 4 or 5 years old. It's before George Floyd, but the whole cop deal, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, all this stuff is going on. And he wants me, you, and everybody to believe that 8 cops surrounded him and 2 white coworkers because Stephen A. Smith had a suspended license? And then he wants you to believe that he got released from jail because some woman in Atlanta that works for CNN kept calling the Troy police. And that's why they let him out. And he wants you to further believe that he had a bail of $250, he had $241, and his instinct isn't to call the 2 white reporters that were with him when he got wrongfully arrested for $9. All he needed was $9. He calls Atlanta to get out of jail. He doesn't call the guys that were just with him. Hey guys, I need $9 so I can get out of jail. Now let me call Atlanta. And this woman's going to harass the police and they're going to let me out of jail because she's from CNN. We're supposed to believe this? Who wrote this? Who wrote this with the expectation? Or who says this? This is him in his own words. He tells us very similar story, the same story in his book. I read it for myself and I'm reading it going, really? These people that are installed at the top of these industries, they're comfortable distorting the truth. They're comfortable with exaggerations. They're comfortable with telling farcical stories. And maybe they're comfortable because we believe them. I mean, he sat in a crowd. And if you go watch that whole interview he's doing with the one white dude, there's other journalists in this crowd. I think he's at a library and he's promoting his book. There's other journalists in this crowd listening to these farcical stories. And no one is saying, like, that don't add up. What are you doing? He's comfortable telling, and he's calling out. You got to go watch this interview. He's so arrogant and so over the top. And I just want to thank this guy for coming out and blah. Who buys this? Stephen A. is a myth. Stephen A. is a plant. You remember when Kwame Brown kept insinuating like David Stern and the NBA gave Stephen A. instructions on how to criticize Kwame Brown? When Kwame was saying that, I didn't fully understand it. Now I do. That's the job. All these guys have batteries put in their back. And it's their job to distort and lie. I'm a little out of breath. We're going to bring on Steve Kim, and we'll get Steve Kim's take on a lot of this. Hopefully, I hope. Hadley, is Steve Kim watching? I hope. I did want his take. So we'll bring in the Korean Cosell, and we'll wrap this show up next.
Owen Carey, previously on Fearless.
I had 4 interactions with Dion. leading up to that exit meeting that made me think, I don't think he cares how hard we work. I think he's just going to get rid of us. And these 4 interactions were all in the same place. They were all in the elevator going up from the locker room. These times I was alone in that elevator with him, just 2 men. And the first 3 times, I'm just trying to make myself known, let him know, hey, coach, I respect you. I want to be here. So I'd say, hey, Coach Prime, how you doing? It's good to see you. And he was on his phone typing, I don't know if it was a message or a tweet, and he would just look up at me and go back to his phone. Not even a nod.
모두 다 빨리 박수 쳐 기다리지 말고 서둘러 Reason that I'm back is to feed you raps and I see that you are 배불러 So fly.
All right, welcome back. Let's bring in the Korean Cosell. Cosell, before I get to Stephen A. Smith, I got to give you this opportunity. Take 90 seconds, 2 minutes, your thoughts on the national championship game. I know that was a big night for you, the end of the college football season. What should we think about that?
What we really should think about is your disparagement for years of one Jim Harbaugh, the prodigal son who came back to Ann Arbor to restore the glory. There's been a procession of coaches post Lloyd Carr, including one Brady Hoke, that just could not live up to the standards. But for all those players who stuck it out, those who stayed will become champions. And it came true because I don't want to hear any more disparagement, any more criticism of Jim Harbaugh, Captain Khakis, who proved once and for all that he's an elite coach. I don't want to hear now, though, this stamps him as a great coach. No. From the time he went unbeaten at San Diego to his run at Stanford to his run at San Francisco and to now the coronation of the king, the national titles, Jim Harbaugh has always been elite. And it is time for guys like you, Jason Whitlock, to give him his proper credit. That's what really goes through my mind.
And I will give him his proper credit. And look, just like you said, San Diego, Stanford, 49ers, and now Michigan, wherever he goes, major winning follows. I just wanted him to prove it. That's all. That's as a Brady Hoke supporter, as a Brady Hoke Ball State guy, I just hated the way everybody took a dump on Brady Hoke and then anointed Harbaugh as if, he had nothing to prove. And he did have something to prove. He needed to win a championship. He's won a championship. He's clearly one of the great coaches in football, whether it be high school, college, or pro. And so now I'm off his back. No different. Again, I'm capable of pivoting and saying, yeah, I was a little bit wrong and harsh. No different than what I've done with Shannon Sharpe. As he continues to put out good content that I enjoy, I'm going to celebrate it. And I was a critic. Now that you're doing stuff I like, I'm going to celebrate it. Now that Jim Harbaugh has that championship at Michigan, I'm going to celebrate it.
Yeah, I just remember a couple of years ago, during their first playoff run, their one loss to Michigan State, they blew a lead, and I get a text right after the game from one Jason Whitlock. Don't get a lot of those. And all it said was Harbaugh. And I'm like, okay, and just Harbaugh. But, every time that they've beaten Ohio State, which is now, 3 straight years, I don't get any texts that say Ryan Day. I don't even get a Harbaugh. But look at what he's done on a serious level. He came to Michigan when they were struggling as a program, okay? Ohio State was on the greatest run that they've ever had since Woody Hayes. And under that just monstrous run of Urban Meyer, and then he handed it off to Ryan Day. So he had to work on that. But he leaves this program with 3 straight victories over the hated Buckeyes, 3 straight playoff appearances, and now a chip. And now he's going to come over, hopefully to L.A., to make the Los Angeles Chargers relevant in our city. End of story.
Tell you what I find humorous about, thank God Harbaugh was white, and so I was allowed to criticize him even though he was successful. without people, going, "Oh, you're obsessed. You hate white people." I was allowed to criticize Harbaugh, and he's had far more coaching success than Deion Sanders. But
There we go. Oh boy!
There I go. There's your daily dose of Deion. Daily dose of Deion. Well, today I gave you a daily dose of Stephen A. Smith, and this morning when I started getting tweets from people saying Stephen A's brought out his fat bastard shtick again on ESPN, and then he's crying on Molly's shoulder, and all. I was shocked. I was shocked that he would bring this beef to his ESPN First Take show, but I think the guy's a little controlled by his emotions. Your thoughts on the latest development in the feud between myself and Stephen A. Smith?
Yeah, I found it interesting that he brought it out. I mean, for a guy he says he does not care about, pays no mind to, you have become that pebble in his Air Jordan. And obviously he feels it every time he takes a step. And it's interesting he said something about, I'm a writer, this is my book. Yeah, right. I think the question is, and you brought this out last Friday, is Stephen A. Smith a fiction writer? Is he a guy that tells the truth, or is he more Stephen King? That's what we're going to find out here. And he seems very, very flustered. And he does protest a lot. And I thought it was interesting that Molly and Shannon were trying to pull him back in, kind of saying, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't go there. But, yeah, I think it's really interesting. I saw this video that I sent to you from Pink Book Lessons. By the way, that lady there does a hell of a job. Shout out to you, Pink Book Lessons. But she actually did a breakdown of what Cat Williams said about Steve Harvey. And when I'm watching this video that came out a day or two ago, I kept thinking, wow, this kind of reminds me a lot of a certain guy that Jason talked about. So now it's Stephen A. Harvey. I mean, you talk about industry plants. You talk about people that are put on a pedestal for a reason to push a message. As I watched this particular vignette, it was actually almost impossible not for me to draw the parallels between Harvey and Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah, I don't think Cat Williams knew that that's what he was doing, that he was going to drag Stephen A. Smith into this. Obviously, he intentionally dragged Steve Harvey into it. But I do think Cat Williams has opened people's eyes, and we should look at all these people at the top of all these industries. Well, how did they get there? Are they actually the best and the brightest? Are they the most honest? Or are they people willing to stick to a script and make sure they push key talking points? Hey, take the COVID vaccine. Hey, don't be against illegal immigration. Hey, if Jewish people are upset about some book or some documentary Kyrie put out, you need to be upset. And that's, I just want people to understand. That's why I've spent all day today trying to walk you through, like, this has been going on for decades. Go, Dan Rather, and the way he promoted the lies around the Zapruder film. Have you ever seen that video of Dan Rather in 1963? Oh, you haven't seen this video?
Oh. Wow.
Play the mashup video of Dan Rather in November of 1963 and with the actual Zapruder film, the mashup video. Play that for Steve Kim.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Now, play the other video with Dan Rather on screen as he shows.
In the next instant,
Kennedy,
with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Steve, Dan Rather was part of 2 or 3 members of the media that they showed the Zapruder film before the rest of the American public ever got to see it. I think it was several years before the rest of the public ever saw the Zapruder film. So they sent him out in 1963 to lie about it, to support the narrative that Lee Harvey Oswald had shot him from the back. This is what made Dan Rather's career. This is how he got to be the heir apparent to Walter Cronkite. They've been installing people for years.
I remember Dan Rather relatively late in his career. Didn't he have to do a retraction over some lie about President Bush? I
Yes.
seem to remember that. I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty egregious. That CBS News, and I don't know if it was associated with 60 Minutes, because that's what I always think of him as. Or maybe, I don't even know if he was a part of that team, but it's to me, here's the thing that gets me about Stephen A. Smith. And I'm watching this game at Coach JB's house, and they show the private box of Michael Jordan. Now, Jordan was there because the University of Michigan is a Jordan brand. And he's out there schmoozing, and I guess Derek Jeter was there, obviously, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And he's just having a great time, and he loves being out there. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, does Stephen A. Smith even know one player? Could he be able to name two players on either team? I'm being dead serious. Maybe Penix, because he's a black quarterback. He probably knows Penix. But really, I was thinking to myself, could he even name two or three players on either squad that's on that field as he's quote unquote at the game as a fan? I just look, Stephen A. Smith has his strengths. I think telling the truth sometimes or articulating certain points that I think are way beyond him, like that rant he had on illegal immigration, how we should all be supporting it. That I just think, again, Stephen A. Smith, stay in your lane.
I'm not sure what his lane is other than distorting the truth, though, Steve, because, and again, you played high school baseball. And
Yes.
so, and you've covered boxing and followed the sports world for a long time. Are you listening to how, and again, you're possibly not paying attention to all this, but Stephen A. is telling people that he received a full basketball scholarship based off a one-day tryout at Winston-Salem State. And that he literally, in his book, tells a story that in February of 1988, he plays a one-on-one basketball game with some former Winston-Salem State player who's older. The guy's so impressed that he says, Stephen, I'm going to drive you down to North Carolina next week and have you try out for Big House Games. Stephen A. says they drive down on a Saturday in February, and that the next day, Sunday morning, he shows up to a scrimmage that the team is having, and they check him into the scrimmage. He makes 17 straight three-pointers, and Big House Games gives him a scholarship on the spot. Steve, February, what's going on? College basketball teams are wrapping up their seasons, preparing for their postseason conference tournaments and all that. Stephen A. is saying that basically they played a game on Saturday, and on Sunday they have a scrimmage where Stephen A. checks in late, and Big House Gaines says, yeah, give him a scholarship. Who tells this story?
Jason, from what I know about college basketball, when there's a walk-on tryout, generally those happen, I believe, in the preseason. I don't know of any open workouts that are going on for basketball players in college in February during like the heart of conference play. And last I checked, there's no waiver wire in college basketball. I know there's the portal now. And the other thing is, if you were good enough ever to hit 17 three-pointers, so you're the Steph Curry of Winston-Salem. So you never got into a game to score 1.75 points per game? Never mind two. I remember with Stephen A. Smith a few years ago, ESPN tried to interject him into the combat sports. So obviously they have a deal with Top Rank and they do the UFC fights. He was a part of a couple of broadcasts on both sports, and it was very obvious it was surface level at best with boxing. Like he knew a few fighters, obviously the Crawfords and the Errol Spences. Okay. But when it came to the UFC, I think they actually tried to use him on one of the fights. He was so overmatched. And I remember there's this famous clip where Joe Rogan is looking at him in disbelief. like almost disgust, as if to say, get this clown out of here. Then there's this video of Stephen A. trying to work the hand pads, doing a boxing workout. Jason, they were better off not releasing it. And again, I'm not trying to say that I can fight, because I can't, but I mean, it was so bad. It was so bad. It was actually a bad look. So yeah, I mean, none of this really surprises me all that much when it comes to most of these guys.
The other one, just because you played high school baseball, and again, you're a little younger than Stephen A. and I, but we're the same era. He's in New York, I'm in Indiana, you're in California. He talks about making his high school basketball team as a senior. He got cut as a junior. He makes it as a senior, and he describes it again as a one-day tryout to where they have a scrimmage, and he makes a bunch of shots, and then at the end, he challenges the best guy on the team to a one-on-one matchup and destroys him in a one-on-one matchup. And the coach, Harvey Stoller, says, "Welcome to the varsity basketball team, Stephen A." Who tells a story? If you're familiar with sports at all, who tells a story like that? Who reduces a tryout to a one-day deal? Were baseball tryouts in California, were they a one-day deal in California in high school? I don't remember that.
I mean, who are we talking about? Stephen A. Smith or Walter Mitty? All I know is this. Basically, at least at Montebello High School, the way you got onto the baseball team is really the program. You had to kind of enroll. Instead of being in the regular PE class, you got to go to baseball class if you wanted to. And then from the rest of the year, we're doing baseball drills. And the way you would work your way up is that you would play on the freshman team. And then if you were good enough as a sophomore, you'd be on the varsity or the JV. Now, I went freshman year JV, and I played varsity twice, but rode the bench my junior year, was a slightly above average left fielder in my senior year. But I don't remember a lot of people actually just getting onto the team by trying out one time. Like literally. So you get to take batting practice and you look like Tony Gwynn. No one was saying, hey, you know what? You're our starting center fielder. It rarely happens like that. So I don't to me, that's a great work of fiction by Stephen A. He's got a very vivid imagination, it looks like.
See, he also says, and I'm going to let you go after this one, but he claims that he failed a single assignment. He didn't fail a class, he failed a single assignment, and that got him booted off his high school basketball team. Failing a single assignment.
Ouch, really? That is so.
It's in his book.
So he's good enough to beat the best player in one-on-one, which isn't really basketball, it's just a game, okay? So he makes the varsity, right? But he fails a single assignment, so that gets him thrown off the team. So then with all of that, he still has a college career. This is fascinating. This is fascinating. Wow.
Thank you, Steve. We'll see you tomorrow, hopefully on a different topic. But I'm not done yet. I'm gonna put a little summary on all of this, or try to speculate on what potentially could have happened here. If you connect the dots on Stephen A. and what ties potentially all these exaggerations or fabrications, what ties it all together? What's the potential explanation? Let's take Stephen A. at his word that coming out of high school, he was 5'9", 130 pounds. That's what he says. Those are his words. I didn't make them up, taking him at his word. And that somehow he challenged a 6'2", 215-pound guy who was a hell of an athlete to a one-on-one deal, and that's how he made his high school team. But he fails a single assignment and gets booted off the team. And as I've told y'all previously, I've looked at that 1986 high school yearbook. I've talked to one of Stephen A. Smith's classmates who remembers Stephen A. making the team, little scrawny kid making the team as a senior, begging his way on. But Stephen A. disappeared from the team, according to Stephen A., and he's not pictured anywhere in the Thomas Edison High School 1986 yearbook. How? Was it this one assignment he failed, or did something else happen that perhaps got him removed from the team and or school or what? I don't know. It's hard for me to figure out. In his book, he then says, and in the, they sent me the program from their 1986 graduation, and Stephen A. Smith is listed as a graduate, and it says in there that he's going to FIT, that he's going to Fashion Institute Technology, and so he goes there for a year. And so remember, coming out of high school, 5'9", 130 pounds, and he goes on the FIT basketball team, according to him. And then he doesn't mention playing, or he says that the coach, Marvin Rippey, was pulling him in and out of the lineup. And maybe he said he started sometime, then sometimes he didn't play. Farcical what he said. And Marvin Rippey exists. I found articles written about him and the FIT program. And there, I found an article where it referenced at one point they were ranked 15th in the nation. And so some of that's true. But in Stephen A.'s book, he later says, without explanation, without going into detail, that he left the school. And then there's this, and so Stephen A. graduates high school in 1986. In 86, 87, he claims to be on the FIT basketball team for a time. He leaves at some point. I don't know when. I've talked to a guy that was playing junior college basketball at that time, went to high school with Stephen A. Smith, went to a competing junior college school, played against FIT, and was like, hey, Stephen A. was nowhere on that team. I would have hugged him up. I would have been like, because, me and Stephen A. were friendly in high school. He wasn't on the team when we played them that year. Who knows? But then there's an unexplained year. So 86, he graduates high school. 86, 87, he's at FIT. And then 87, 88, there's no real explanation of what's going on with Stephen A. Smith. There's no, next thing we know, he's at a playground tryout with Harold Kidd. That's the next thing we see in the book. There's no explanation of what he did his second year. Did he go to FIT for a second year? Did he just stay at home? I think maybe that's referenced. Maybe he was doing nothing, but there's just no explanation. And so my speculation is that Stephen A. had a growth spurt while he was in junior college and went from 5'9" to 6'1". And that growth spurt perhaps made Stephen A. believe, oh, I'm a hellified basketball player now. I'm 6'1". I was this little tiny kid, and perhaps he begged Harold Kidd or someone else to take him down to North Carolina to try out for Big House games. And he went down and had that tryout, and of some sort, who knows when, I tend to doubt it was in February of 1988. Perhaps he talked his way onto the team in the walk-on tryouts that were transpiring in the fall of 1988. That perhaps he went to Winston-Salem State and said, I'm going to try out for the basketball team, and was on the basketball team as a walk-on during the 88-89 season. And he's saying that he broke his kneecap in half in February of 1989. And maybe he suffered some sort of injury as a walk-on as someone that was getting financial aid to go to Winston-Salem State, that he was a body on the team. Helping guys, because again, there are some undersized kids that really can't play a lick that, they'll be on at the end of Duke's bench or at the end of Kansas's bench. Or when I say can't play a lick, generally speaking, they were good high school players. But, undersized and just bodies that help out in practice. And maybe that's what Gary Stevens was, a body that had claimed to be 6'3" and was coming down to try out on the team. He gets down there and it's like, well, man, this dude's a midget. And so he's never on the team. Stephen A. survives long enough to get the Wilt Chamberlain photo, but doesn't play in a game in this 88-89 season, claims he broke his kneecap in half. And you got to go listen to the explanation of how he's going up for a layup. And he says that basically, he doesn't say he broke his kneecap upon landing. He says it's when he elevated to shoot a layup on a fast break, he snaps his kneecap in half. I mean, snaps your kneecap. It's just a farcical story. But he's got the Wilt Chamberlain photo, and he's got some practices that he participated in. And Gary Stevens, perhaps, he was a part of the initial walk-on tryouts at summer. I don't know. It's hard for me to figure it out. But the Gary Stevens guy who runs around promoting himself as Stephen A.'s teammate, there's some Gary Stevens who seems to match his description, who played at this old Westbury college, met his wife at Old Westbury. And I'm not 1,000% sure, but I am sure, but I'm just not 1,000% sure. It seems like Gary Stevens, Phil Hayes, and Stephen A. Smith all grew up in New York within 3 or 4 miles of each other. And they all I'm pretty sure it's Phil Hayes. It's not Mark Turner. I'm pretty sure it's Phil Hayes. They all grew up within 3 miles of each other in New York. And all end up with this weird story about being midgets on the Winston-Salem State basketball team. It's I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm hoping that somebody knows some of these Winston-Salem State basketball players that haven't been a part of selling this narrative around Stephen A. Smith, and maybe they're watching this show, or maybe Toby Barber or Jonathan Harden or any of these guys that actually provably played at Winston-Salem State. And perhaps they can help me and us understand it. I know that Monte Ross was on those teams, and he's a college basketball coach, and he's mentioned in Big House Gaines' book. Stephen A. is not. And so I guess what I'm insinuating is like, are there people participating in this exaggerated story for money, perhaps? If I'm Winston-Salem State and someone as wealthy and famous as Stephen A. Smith wants to sell an exaggerated story about his college basketball career while helping raise money for the school or while donating money to the school, I get where Winston-Salem State, there's something in it for them. And so let's help sell the story that, Stephen A. Smith and Big House Gaines were like father and son. And Stephen A. Smith wrote a story calling for Big House Gaines to retire, and it set the whole campus on fire. Yeah, we'll sign it. We'll play along with that, Stephen. Keep the checks coming. Keep the attention coming. We're a poor school, and you're a high-profile alum. This works for us. if you want to sell some exaggerated story to build up your reputation so that black athletes will see you as, yeah, he's not a nerdy sports writer, he's a former player. And if you weren't a high-level college basketball player or professional player, Stephen A. would bust your ass. That's all I can think of. Perhaps, I would love for you all, if you know anybody that went to Winston-Salem State. You know, Yancey Thigpen was on the football team at the same time that Stephen A. Smith. Remember Yancey Thigpen, the wide receiver, Pittsburgh Steeler? He played football at Winston-Salem State at the same time as Stephen A. Smith's illustrious tryout career. Maybe you know him. Maybe there's somebody that's like, well, I know this is good. I know Winston-Salem State's making money off this, but who can help us understand this story? Because I don't understand it at this point. If you have any information or know someone or know anything about this, email me and us, fearlessblazeshow@gmail.com. That's fearlessblazeshow@gmail.com. We'll play tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow.
Waiting for the countdown, coming off the breakdown, standing in line for freedom. Looking for a breakout, feeling like a standoff, nothing in life like freedom. Came like a fighter, striking like a ladder, making all these moves for freedom. I want freedom. No negotiation, my sister, no relation. We all just wanna have freedom. Sitting on a corner, never been alone. I'll break my back for freedom. Blessed, we are living, get back. We are receiving, no deceiving. We all wanna be free. We want freedom. I wanna be.